Hey, it's the Retro XP podcast, a podcast dedicated to retro video games from the first and second generation with the Odyssey and the Atari 2600 all the way up to Gen 7 with the Xbox 360 and the PS3. On today's episode, we'll be celebrating a lot of milestones as 2026 is the year of many storied franchises' anniversaries. From Legend of Zelda and Castlevania to Resident Evil and Halo, we'll be celebrating the franchise that defined us throughout the years, and if they're still here to this day. So how many of you guys and girls were there from the beginning of a lot of these franchises? Definitely after you listen to this episode, let me know. Otherwise, let's get going. Retro XP is part of the Hair of the Dogcast network, so be sure to check out patreon.com/Hair of the Dogcast to check out every show the network has and get access to the exclusive community Discord. There is a 30-day free trial available if you want to try it out. Otherwise, you can follow me on X, Threads, Instagram, and YouTube at Retro X Podcast. Whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on, be sure to follow and enable those notifications so you can find out when I drop a new episode. Now, I'm pleasantly surprised to report that my Retro January challenge is actually going pretty good. I have not touched any of my modern systems at all this month. I have been playing and sticking to my retro games. Recently, I just fired up Rise to Honor for the PS2, which, man, that was a great game in terms of action and really good use of the analog stick, the right analog stick, to be kind of like the main attack button, which was, I don't know, I thought it was pretty cool. I thought it was pretty intuitive. Made the game a lot of fun. I moved on to Dead to Rights after that because I think that era of action games was pretty cool. I played other games like I said, I previously talked about Link to the Past, Side Girls for the PS2. I started Final Fantasy VI. That's one of my goals of this year, is to beat Final Fantasy VI. Haven't beaten it at all ever in my history. Also played Operation Wolf on the Nintendo. That did not age well at all. And then Need for Speed Underground. I just recently watched a video on the racing games of that era, and Need for Speed Underground was definitely one that, man, that's a fun game. Really defined the tuner culture, and a really good snapshot in time of what the early 2000s was like. And if you weren't there, it's hard to describe, because if you've never played Need for Speed Underground before and you're pick it up now and play it now, like it's definitely unique. It's definitely weird, and it's like, is this really what it was like back then? And I would say, in the media, and if you lived in a big city, yes, it was like that. So it was really fun to kind of jump back into it. And while there's better racing games out there, that was definitely something, a fun game at that time. So let's dive into the topic now. That's enough about talking about some of the games I've been playing. So in a past episode, I talked about the remasters and remakes that we'll be getting this year, and I thought it would be appropriate to look back at some of the gaming franchises that will be celebrating milestones this year. And there's a ton to unpack here, so I'll talk about the first game within the storied franchise and or the last game to have been released, or an upcoming release in said franchises that we're expecting this year. So kind of a mixed bag of a lot of different things. So let's start from the back. Donkey Kong. It's a storied franchise that I'm thankfully nice to hear that I'm older than by a couple months. Donkey Kong is a video game series that came out in July of 1981, which is making it 45 years old, and was created by the Japanese game designer. Many of you may have heard of him before, Shigeru Miyamoto, for the Nintendo. It follows the adventures of Donkey Kong, who's a large, powerful gorilla, not a donkey, and other members of the Kong family of apes in future games in the series. The name Donkey Kong was actually derived by Miyamoto from stubborn ape. Miyamoto used donkey to convey stubborn in English, while Kong was simply used to imply him being a large ape. Cranky Kong, as we know him now in more recent games, was actually the original Donkey Kong from the first game in the series, the Donkey Kong game in 1981 that I'm talking about. I actually did know that. I'm not really up on my Donkey Kong lore, so I've played a lot of Donkey Kong games in the past, but admittedly, my lore isn't really up to speed there. So now we have Donkey Kong, who was actually Cranky's grandson, which I don't know where the Cranky's son actually went. But I think I overheard and read that there was a translation error in Donkey Kong 64 where Cranky called him his son, but that's been debunked by Nintendo themselves as saying, nope, the Donkey Kong now is actually Cranky Kong's grandson. So you got Diddy Kong, which is the nephew of Cranky, or the nephew of Donkey Kong, I think. Ugh, this is going to get confusing. I'm sorry. Buckle in. Then you got the nephew, Diddy Kong. You got Dixie Kong, who's a good friend of Diddy Kong. And then you got Chunky Kong, who appeared in Donkey Kong 64 as a playable character, who is the older brother of Kiddy Kong, who's Dixie's little cousin. There's some more characters, and I'm not going to go into it, but I mean, it's confusing. So let's move on. Even though Miyamoto's team was told it would be a failure, Donkey Kong became Nintendo's first major international success when it came out. $280 million windfall gain rescued Nintendo of America from its financial crisis and established it as a prominent brand in America. So if it wasn't for Donkey Kong, we wouldn't have Nintendo. So it achieved further success in 1982. Nintendo had released a Game & Watch adaptation and licensed it to Coleco for ports to home consoles. Interestingly enough, in 1982, Universal Studios filed a lawsuit alleging Donkey Kong violated its trademark of King Kong. The lawsuit failed when Nintendo's lawyer, Howard Lincoln, discovered that Universal had won a lawsuit in 1976 by declaring that King Kong was actually in the public domain. So, womp womp. The gameplay loop was a character similar looking to Mario, and at the time, in 1981, Mario wasn't an established character yet. Who would climb ladders and platforms to reach Pauline, a woman Donkey Kong was infatuated with, and to rescue her. Along the way, this character had to avoid fireballs, falling barrels, and pits in order to try and save Pauline. It was an arcade hit then and still remains a hit to this day. Most recently, we got Donkey Kong Bonanza, which is a 3D action platformer similar in vein to Donkey Kong 64 and is actually the first 3D game starring Donkey Kong since 64, interestingly enough. This game was made by the same team that developed Super Mario Odyssey game for the Nintendo Switch and is now actually exclusive to the Nintendo Switch too. The producer, Kenta Motokura, said Bonanza was an opportunity to establish separate 2D and 3D Donkey Kong series games as Nintendo had done with Super Mario. So you got different, series in 3D and 2D. So a little bit of both for everybody. This game was released in July of 2025 to critical acclaim. And basically, reviewers described it as a triumphant return for Donkey Kong. And it quickly became the Switch 2's killer app. I would agree with that. I love this game. I mean, the music, level designs, destructible environments, all top notch. Really good. Definitely, if you have a Switch 2, this is a game you should have. Next up, another storied Nintendo franchise is the Legend of Zelda, celebrating its 40th anniversary. And it came out in 1986 with the Legend of Zelda for the Nintendo Entertainment System. This game obviously was inspired by Shigeru Miyamoto as well. What a guy, man. It was inspired by his explorations as a young boy in the hillsides and forests surrounding his childhood home in Sonobe, Japan. According to Miyamoto, one of his most memorable experiences was actually finding a cave entrance randomly in the middle of the woods when he was exploring, and he had referred to the creation of the Zelda games as an attempt to bring to life a miniature garden for players to play with in each game of the series. So Link was kind of, a childlike character, similar in vein to, Miyamoto's own childhood, so to speak. So the story and setting were developed by Takashi Tezuka. Seeking to create a fairy tale adventure game, Tezuka drew inspirations from fantasy books such as J.R.R. Tolkien's The Lord of the Rings. You may have heard of that. According to Kenji Teruya, who wrote the backstory in the first game's manual, the location named Death Mountain was initially a working title for the Legend of Zelda Triforce, which was written with inspirations from battles of medieval Europe. The Master Sword was actually introduced as Excalibur in the French version of A Link to the Past, which is interesting, in which is the sword is regarded as reminiscent to the legend of King Arthur. I mean, in Link to the Past, you pull your sword out of a stone, which in the King Arthur legends, Excalibur was in a stone, and King Arthur was the only person that could actually pull the sword out. Link's steed was named after Epona, which is the Celtic goddess of fertility, interestingly enough. Princess Zelda was named after an American novelist, socialite, and painter Zelda Fitzgerald, as Miyamoto thought the name sounded pleasant and significant. Tezuka modeled Link's appearance after the character of Walt Disney's Peter Pan, in case you saw the similarity. This game actually was one of the first games to introduce an internal battery for saving data. And I would hesitate to call the first game a role-playing game, more so an action-adventure game, although it's got like role-playing game elements to it. I put this as an action-adventure game first. Basically, the game has you roaming the countryside freely, entering dungeons, defeating the bosses, obtaining items, weapons, and pieces of the Triforce of Wisdom. Ganondorf is the evil villain that has stolen part of the Triforce, and you got to take him out. The franchise has had many titles in its name and even spawned a timeline of sorts, with Link starring as the main protagonist in the majority of the titles in the series. Of course, with this timeline, there's different eras and different years. They're not all the same Link, with some exceptions being the Link in Ocarina of Time and Majora's Mask are the same. Wind Waker and Phantom Hourglass, same Link. Link to the Past and Link's Awakening, same Link. And then Breath of the Wild and Tears of the Kingdom. Speaking of which, actually, the last title we received in this franchise is Tears of the Kingdom, which is a direct sequel to Breath of the Wild and came out in 2023. And it's a pretty divisive game. Some may have mocked it for being almost the same as Breath of the Wild, which it largely is, I must say, and relied too much on the building mechanics, although I don't really agree with that last sentiment. Me personally, it's not my favorite game, and it's one I haven't beaten yet for the most part because, yeah, I did think it was too similar to Breath of the Wild, and it's, in my opinion, a far better game. Breath of the Wild is. So don't you fret. We're sure to have more Legend of Zelda in the near future. Maybe something this year to celebrate 40 years. Maybe a Twilight Princess port to the Switch 2, maybe. Ocarina of Time remake. I mean, easy money. Possibilities are endless. We did have Echoes of Wisdom come out, which is a game where it stars you as the protagonist Zelda. However, I tried playing this game, and this came out, I want to say, I think it came out last year. I didn't write this down because honestly, I blocked this out of my memory. But Zelda herself could spawn items and enemies to fight for her instead of her being the kind of like an actual fighting protagonist, which I could not get behind. The game looked great. It looked a little bit similar to Link's Awakening, that remake, but give Zelda a freaking weapon. Give her a weapon. I don't understand why they had to shoehorn her to be oh, she can't fight for herself, so she's got to spawn items and other enemies to fight for her. It's such a weird concept. I mean, give her a spear, give her a sword, give her dual swords, give her even a bow and arrow that she can use constantly, something. Have her fight for herself. Honestly, I thought it was a missed opportunity, but anyway. Metroid is also 40 years old this year, and this come out for the NES as well. It's an action-adventure game franchise, and the player controls a bounty hunter named Samus Aran, who protects the galaxy from space pirates, and their attempts to harness the power of the parasitic Metroid creatures. The game Metroid actually combines the platforming of Super Mario Brothers, the exploration of Legend of Zelda, all in a science fiction setting and an emphasis on non-linear gameplay. Most Metroid games are side-scrolling, while the 3D games use a first-person, viewpoint perspective. Players battle hostile alien enemies and obtain power-ups as they progress through the game world, with few non-player characters in them as well. Those non-player characters can be quite divisive by some people, by some old-school fans. The game was mostly, if not completely, responsible for the term Metroidvania, a genre of games that have open maps that require mandatory backtracking when your character obtains weapons and items that allow them to access previously inaccessible areas on the map. Metroid was also one of the first video games at this time to feature an exploration to the left as well as the right. It's kind of crazy that you can actually go left or right, freely. So this game was actually remade for the Game Boy Advance as Zero Mission. Samus the story of Metroid. She travels to the planet Zebes to stop the space pirates from using the Metroids to create biological weapons. She defeats enemies like a cybernetic life form Mother Brain, Ridley, who's like this alien bird-looking thing, and Kraid, who's like a large stomach-induced mouth-breathing monster. I don't know how to describe Kraid. Metroids in this game and in the series are actually a species of predatory jellyfish-like organisms that feed on an undetectable life energy found in all living creatures. This franchise has spawned into a Game Boy game, which was a direct sequel. And that direct sequel also got a remake called Samus Returns on the 3DS. It continued on to be, onto the SNES, the game titled Super Metroid. That is one of my top 10 favorite games list of all time. And it's made its way into the first-person shooter trilogy for the GameCube and Wii called the Metroid Prime trilogy. There was also another game called Metroid Other M that came out on the Wii that we won't talk about. Recently, as of 2025, we finally got Metroid Prime 4 Beyond for the Switch and Switch 2. It had skipped a whole generation of the Wii U, which admittedly wasn't a short. It wasn't a long generation, but it skipped it entirely. And while we got Metroid Dread for the Switch pretty late in its life cycle, we hadn't gotten a Prime game since the Wii. And Prime 4 is actually pretty divisive, as originally it was supposed to be developed by Bandai Namco, but Nintendo squashed what they made and called up Retro Studios to take over. The signs of mixed ideas were pretty present, and while I enjoyed it immensely, I also call it the best Zelda game we've seen in years due to its similarities to older Zelda games like Ocarina of Time and Wind Waker. I mean, let me know if you played this and if you think you agree. Nintendo said this one is the start of a new trilogy and timeline, and the end of 4, if you beat it, ends on quite the cliffhanger. So we'll be seeing more soon. Dragon Quest also came out this year in 1986, 40 years old as well. If you're from the US, like I am, you'll know this franchise as Dragon Warrior, and it was called Dragon Warrior in America due to a trademark conflict with a tabletop RPG in America called Dragon Quest as well. So it was called Dragon Quest in Japan and pretty much everywhere else, but in America it was called Dragon Warrior. And actually, upon research, I had no idea why they called it that. The final title to use the Dragon Warrior title was the PS1 title Dragon Warrior 7 in 2001. And the year after that, Square Enix filed the trademark for Dragon Quest in the US. So pretty much from there on in, Dragon Quest the rest of the way. The first Dragon Warrior game, quote unquote Dragon Warrior game, came out in the NES. It was developed by Japanese game designer Yuri Horii, character designer Akira Toriyama, and composer Koichi Sugiyama for Enix at the time. And it was your standard turn-based combat RPG. And Dragon Warrior presented players with clear objective from the start and uses a series of smaller scenarios to increase the hero's strength and, campaigns and side quests in order to achieve the major objective. The game begins in King Loric's chamber at Tantigel Castle, can never say that right, where the hero receives information about the Dragon Lord, whom he must defeat, and the stolen balls of light, which he must retrieve. Interesting story concept. After receiving some items and gold, the hero sets out on his quest. Much of Dragon Warrior is actually spent talking to townspeople and gathering information from them that leads to additional places, events, secrets, items, towns, whatever. These towns contain shops that sell improved weapons and armor, general stores where the player may buy other goods, inns that allow the hero to recover his health and magic, and of course shops that offer keys for purchase. You're engaging in combat, gaining experience, leveling up to make you and your team more powerful, and ready to take on that Dragon Lord at the end. Interestingly enough, this isn't the first title in the timeline, as Dragon Warrior 2 and 3, now Dragon Quest, came out afterwards and took place actually before the first game. So initially in the timeline, it's Dragon Quest 3 and then Dragon Quest 1 and 2 in that order. Over the past couple years, we saw this trilogy remade from the ground up with pretty gorgeous looking storybook-like graphics and colors, and they termed it HD 2D. I haven't played them yet, and I honestly have never played a Dragon Quest or Dragon Warrior game in my life. I aim to change that this year. However, coming soon, in less than a month from this recording in February, we'll be getting a full-on remake of Dragon Quest VII. This game did have a remake before on the Nintendo DS, but we're now seeing a full-on remake with, quote, modernized controls. and then modernized narrative designs, and of course, the graphics getting a huge jump, and then also like CGI, really good looking, CGI anime style cutscenes. I'm looking forward to this, and I'm excited to dive into this story franchise. I have no idea what I'm getting myself into, so we'll see. Another sad one, a sad one here actually. Kid Icarus. Kid Icarus also turns 40 this year, and it got its start on the NES as well. Kid Icarus was an action platformer and revolved around your character Pit with wings on his back, similar to the ancient Greek character Icarus. The plot of the game revolves around protagonist Pit's quest for 3 sacred treasures which he must equip to rescue the Greek-inspired fantasy world of Angel Land. Very unique. And its ruler, the goddess Paltina. I keep wanting to say Paulatina, but like I'm just keep adding letters in that I shouldn't be adding. Paltina. The player I'll still be calling it Paulatina, watch. The player controls Pit through platform areas while fighting monsters, collecting items, and pretty much the objective is to reach the end of the levels and find and defeat boss monsters that guard these 3 treasures. Admittedly, it didn't receive well at the start, and it was oftentimes criticized for being pretty unfairly difficult and, not showcasing really good graphics, especially at the time. I admit playing this game, it was quite challenging. I didn't stick with it really. Especially when I was a kid. And there hasn't been many games for Kid Icarus in the past, with one Game Boy title, Kid Icarus of Myths and Monsters, that had similar gameplay elements, and Kid Icarus Uprising, which was a Nintendo 3DS game that came out in 2012. So that was the last Kid Icarus game we got. Basically, the premise of Uprising is the goddess of darkness, Medusa, returns to destroy humanity, and Pit goes on missions against her, and then, of course, against the forces of Hades, the Lord of the Underworld, and finding the source behind Medusa's return. Basically, the gameplay centers around Pit controlling him like in these airborne rail shooter segments and ground-based third-person shooter segments. In addition to the single campaign, there's a lot of unlockable items that can be obtained in several multiplayer modes that you can play with 6 players. You can't do that now because Nintendo 3DS shut down the online store and pretty much made multiplayer gaming unavailable unless you find ways around it. But the gameplay honestly was awesome. It was an interesting choice to have it be an on-rail shooter, but it was so graphically impressive and ran so smooth on the 3DS that I really didn't care about it at all. The 3D actually looked really good. It was fun to play, in my opinion. And unfortunately, this franchise isn't anywhere near Nintendo's radar to continue, unfortunately. So if you want to see Pit anywhere and Paulatina, I think I did it again. Paulatina. Jeez. I knew I'd do it. You'll have to settle for Smash Brothers titles. So they're both playable characters in those. I mean, what do you think? Like, even though it hasn't had a main presence in any of Nintendo's franchises, do you think Kid Icarus needs to come back? Me personally, I think so. I think it'd be worth a shot. I don't know if, it would be similar in scope to the 3DS title, but I don't know. Something. Give me something. Even just bring Kid Icarus into the Switch 2 library if you could figure out a way to do it. I don't know. A lot of 40th anniversaries this year. One of them, another one is Castlevania, entering its 40th year on this planet. We got the side-scrolling action game Castlevania in 1986. Now, technically, it didn't come out onto the NES in America until the next year, but it hit Japan's Famicom system in 1986. Players in this first game control Simon Belmont, descendant of a legendary vampire hunter who enters the castle of Count Dracula to destroy him when he suddenly reappears 100 years after Simon's ancestor vanquished him. Castlevania, the game itself, utilizes platform gameplay and is divided into basically 6 blocks or 6 levels of 3 stages each for like a total of 18 stages. If the maths. Yeah. Simon can move, jump, crouch, climb stairs, and basically his main weapon is a magic whip. It's called the Vampire Killer as his primary combat weapon. Throughout the game, you can find extra weapons to use during combat, like Cross that kind of serves as a boomerang. You can throw holy water and throwable axes as well. We've seen many Castlevania collections released lately, including Nintendo DS titles, which was, I think, one of the most recent collections that we got. The last real Castlevania game we got from Konami was Castlevania Lords of Shadow 2 in 2014. And this game was not not the greatest. I would hesitate to even call it a Castlevania game. The first Castlevania Lords of Shadow was actually pretty solid entry. It was a really good foray into kind of, being like third person action and adventure game. Like many games were kind of getting into in this generation. A lot of games wanted to kind of copy the God of War style gameplay, and Castlevania was trying to jump in on this as well. So, but Lords of Shadow 2, I don't know. The game was basically had you play as Dracula. You were playing as Dracula, going up against Satan. What a premise. The game was taking place in the modern day, would clash with almost every game in its history. Every game was taking place in some sort of medieval setting or some old world setting. But now it's like you're, traversing major city streets and major, skyscrapers and everything. The combat was fun from what I remember, but the story was pretty muddled. The graphics weren't the best. They weren't really showcasing what the Gen 7 hardware could do at the time. And from what I heard, it had a pretty disastrous development history. At least from what I've heard I've read in the past from like people that were in the development teams saying how terrible the game direction was. I mean, who knows what Konami's cooking up lately? I mean, they've had successful re-entries of storied franchises like, recently, like Silent Hill, Metal Gear Solid lately. So maybe Castlevania could be next. I mean, one can wish. One can wish. Sonic the Hedgehog Blast processed its way into our homes 35 years ago in 1991. See what I did there? For the Sega Genesis. It's a Japanese video game series, if you don't know. It was created by developers Yuji Naka, Naoto Oshima, and Hirokazu Yashuhara for the Sega. I think Yuji Naka is in jail now because of insider trading. He was accused of insider trading in Japan. So, the franchise follows Sonic, an anthropomorphic blue hedgehog with supersonic speed, who battles the mad scientist Dr. Eggman and his robot army. The main Sonic the Hedgehog games are pretty much platformers, mostly developed by Sonic Team, although the Sonic games have kind of branched off into other franchises and other games and series like, spin-offs, racing games, fighting games, party games, and sports genres. Pretty much at the time, Sega developed the first Sonic the Hedgehog game to prove to themselves, to provide themselves with a mascot to compete with Nintendo's Mario. Sega needed a killer game, and they needed a killer, mascot at the time because, of course, this was the time of the mascot wars that lasted longer. Now there's no such thing as mascot wars. I mean, what's Sony's mascot? What's Microsoft's mascot right now? I mean, Nintendo's got one still in Mario, but they're pretty much the only one holding strong with any sort of mascot. Basically, Sonic's success helped Sega become one of the leading video game companies during the fourth generation in the early 90s. Sega Technical Institute developed the next 3 Sonic games, plus the spin-off Sonic Spinball, which that came out in 1993. A number of Sonic games were also developed for Sega's 8-bit consoles like the Master System and Game Gear. After a hiatus during the unsuccessful Saturn era, we did get a couple Sonic games there, but nothing really major. The first major 3D Sonic game, though, we got was Sonic Adventure, which released in 1998 for the Dreamcast. The last Sonic title to have graced any Sega system was Sonic Adventure 2 for the Dreamcast. And since then, Sega bowed out of the hardware space and became a third-party publisher. The last Sonic game we got recently was Sonic Racing Cross Worlds, which was actually a racing game, which, basically stood out to rival Mario Kart. Before that, we got Sonic and Shadow Generations, which took the original Sonic Generations game from the 360 era and just added Shadow the Hedgehog to it. And before that, in 2022, we actually got Sonic Frontiers, which was an open zone 3D adventure game that many doubted it, would be any good before its release. And actually afterwards, people were like, wow, this is pretty impressive. Me included. Sonic is still around and obviously will be there for the foreseeable future. And although it's had many bumps in the road leading up to today, because there's been quite a few stinkers, but nonetheless, Sonic is still held strong and held on to the test of time, and not only in the gaming space, but in TV, animated cartoons and anime, the comics, and movies. Diablo is up next, and this came out A much different game compared to Sonic the Hedgehog. Diablo came out on PC 30 years ago in 1996. It's an action role-playing game, dungeon crawler video game series, originally developed by Blizzard North. And then Blizzard Entertainment, when they merged into one company, they basically took over after they shut down that studio in 2005. The franchise itself is set in a dark fantasy world of Sanctuary, and its characters are primarily humans, angels, various classes of demons and monsters. Basically, the setting of the first game, Diablo, is in the town of Tristram, the de facto capital of the kingdom of Conduras on the world of Sanctuary. The actual fighting takes place actually beneath the town in a maze of dungeons, catacombs, and caves that lead into the depths of hell. Much different than Sonic the Hedgehog. Basically, the plot of the game centers around your playable character undertaking a series of quests to free Tristram from these hellspawn evil that have been that came out of the ground, and basically has you descending through 12 levels of dungeons into hell itself, and that's the final 4 levels, where the player battles the title character Diablo, Lord of Terror, which throughout the franchise is one of the 7 evil demon lords who once ruled hell. The gameplay is basically an over-the-top view and one that requires basically mastery of weapons, magic, and support. Initially, the game had you choose one of 3 classes: warrior, rogue, and sorcerer. They all had their own skill trees and abilities and weapons that they could use. Most games in the series actually had similar classes, and plenty more, were added into the, future games like Monk, Bard, Barbarian, Necromancer, Paladin, so many others. The last big title to have come out in this franchise was Diablo 4 in 2023. I played it, and it's actually really good. A lot of people were kind of dismayed about Diablo 3 when it came out because it was almost too colorful. Which is an interesting thing to comment about a game. But Diablo, the game series, was always really dark, really gray, really bloody, very gory, very dark. I mean, you're going to hell. You're basically fighting hellspawn monsters. And apparently Diablo 3 was a little bit too colorful for some people. It didn't match the tone of the previous games. So Diablo 4 basically came to really correct that. So I would say they nailed the graphics and they nailed the tone, kind of similar to the previous games. Now, I didn't play Diablo 1 and 2. I played 3. I had fun. I liked 3, even though, it was maybe a little bit too colorful than I thought it'd be. But Diablo 4 was great. It was amazing. I haven't played it, I would say, since it came out. I honestly don't know how long I'm into it, but basically ever since the game came out, there's been 2 other expansions, Vessel of Hatred and the upcoming Lord of Hatred, which is we're going to be getting this year. If you played Diablo 4 right when it came out and haven't since, you'll find that there was a lot of changes to gameplay elements made in response to feedback, from what I understand. So I'm almost thinking like if I should just like start over, just to kind of get used to the new gameplay elements. So we did actually get a remake of Diablo 2 back in 2001, which from what I understand was a pretty good and faithful remake, besides using 3D models instead of the 2D models the original title had. But from what I heard, it looked and played and reviewed great. Persona, a franchise I could just never get into despite me trying. I mean, I only played 2 games in the series. I played Persona 3 Reload, the recent remake, and Persona 5. I'll talk about them, I guess. But Persona 5 is a good game. Like, it's solid, but man, it's just, I don't know, something about like the game being like over 80 hours to beat it just scares me. It's long. Persona is also 30 years old this year, which came out on the first PlayStation back then. It was previously marketed as Shin Megami Tensei Persona outside of Japan. So the Shin Megami Tensei series is kind of spun off. It was the original series, and Persona by itself is like a spin-off of the Shin Megami Tensei series. Basically, it's primarily developed by Atlas, published by Sega. Persona's core features include a group of students, basically as the main cast, so you're always playing as high school students for the most part. A silent protagonist, similar to the mainline Megami Tensei franchise, and you basically engage in combat using personas. Set in the town of Mikage-cho, it follows a group of high school students from St. Hermelin High who are forced to confront an outbreak of demons in their hometown. Send the high school kids to take care. The later series of games began to focus more on the social and societal elements of personas, with the addition of social links, which are directly linked to how personas evolve. And the overall theme is the exploration of the human psyche and how the characters find their true selves. It goes into some dark territory. I know when you play Persona 3, in order to activate your persona, you have to literally put a gun to your head and shoot. It's a weird concept, but it's just part of the gameplay elements. So the series' recurring concepts and design elements draw on Jungian psychology, or Jungian psychology, basically the concept of we create personas for ourselves, psychological personas and tarot cards, along with religious, mythological, and literary themes and influences. It's an interesting story premise, lore premise too as well. The last title we had recently in the series is really Persona 3 Reload, which came out in 2024, which is a remake of the PS2 and PSP title that came out in 2006. We did get Persona Tactica, which is a grid-based tactical RPG in the Persona 5 universe in 2023. But the last real mainline game we officially got was Persona 5, which actually came out in 2016 for the PS3. This game came out on the PS3, and we're still playing it to this day. It came out on the PS4 later on. And I think it got an expansion too as well, which made the game even longer. Ugh. While no official release date has been announced, though, we are getting a Persona 4 remake titled Persona 4 Revival. I don't know if it's coming out this year. I highly doubt it, but keep your ear on the ground for that. Now, next up, I'm not a Pokemon fan at all. I was born too late, and when the games came out, I was too old. I felt like when the game first came out 30 years ago. When the game came out 30 years ago, I was 15 years old. Okay, I was not interested in playing anything, this campy or this kind of. It was childlike. I think it was a game kind of designed for kids, so to speak. So, I mean, I acknowledge how massive it is, how big this series is, and I can understand why it appeals to so many out there. It's a phenomenon. I get it. They're great games. There's a lot of nostalgia attached to them. And I mean, personally, I tried to play the games. I tried to play, I think, Let's Go Eevee and Arceus. I don't think I played. No, I forget what the other one was. I tried playing. The Switch games, basically. I tried to see if I could get into it, but I think I may have missed the boat on this. I just don't have nostalgia for this franchise, and I don't think I can. Even if I went back and maybe tried to play the original ones, I don't think I'd get into it. So Pokemon first Graystar Game Boys back in 1996 with Red and Green. There was also a Blue Edition and a Yellow Edition that came out later on. The player controls the protagonist from an overhead perspective, navigates the fictional region of Kanto in a quest to master Pokemon battling. The goal is to become the champion of the Indigo League by defeating the 8 gym leaders and the top Pokemon trainers in the land, the Elite Four. Another objective is to complete the Pokédex, which is an in-game encyclopedia by obtaining all 151 Pokemon. Red and Blue use the Game Link cable, which connects 2 Game Boy systems and allows Pokemon to be traded or battled between gamers, actually, which is really cool. So if you bought Red and your friend bought Blue or Green, so to speak, or Blue or Yellow, you could actually trade Pokemon, which is kind of cool. All these games feature the same plot, and they can be played separately. Basically, players must trade between both games to obtain all of the original 151 Pokemon. So even if you bought the game, if you bought all the versions of the game, played it on your same Game Boy, you can't collect all of them in one place. So how crazy is that? You need to buy more than one game in the series just to complete your encyclopedia. It sounds so crazy. It sounds predatory, honestly. But nonetheless, these games are still immensely popular and expensive. Spawned into movies, books, card games, and of course, more video games. The more recent title in the franchise is Pokemon Legends Z through A. I don't understand what Z through A means. I'm not into the Pokemon universe. This came out on the Nintendo Switch 1 and 2 in October of last year, 2025. As opposed to previous Pokemon games which featured turn-based combat, Legends Z through A uses real-time combat system that takes into account the positioning of your character, your Pokemon, and the timing of used moves, and allows Pokemon to actually move around and dodge attacks while in battle. So this is a break from the norm. There's also a huge grid list that details the multiple generations, quote, of Pokemon. And we are currently on the 9th generation, if you're curious. And the number of unique Pokemon at this time is 1,025. That's a lot of Pokemon. Oh, next one. Near and dear to my heart. Resident Evil franchise. First Resident Evil game was created by Shinji Mikami and Tokuro Fujiwara for the PlayStation 1, released in 1996, and it quickly identified itself as one of the best horror games at the time. Skyrocketed the newly formed, quote, survival horror franchise of games. The franchise since then has spun off into comics, books, movies, anime, and a really crappy TV series. In Resident Evil, the first game, the player chooses to play as either Chris Redfield or Jill Valentine as they explore the Spencer Mansion to find the missing compatriots of Bravo Team and secure an escape route. The environment is presented from a third-person perspective using fixed camera angles and pre-rendered backgrounds while the player uses tank controls to move. So no matter which way your character is facing, you always push up. Doesn't matter if you're moving toward the screen or moving to the left and to the right. Wherever your character is facing, you hit the up button. The main antagonist corporation, the Umbrella Corporation, is found to have developed bioweapons that turns humans into zombies and can also create deadly monsters. The last official series game we actually got was Resident Evil Village that came out in 2021. This was a first-person game, and it did get a third-person mode, like I think a year after. Unlike many of the previous titles, which were third-person viewpoints, Resident Evil 7, when that came out, was actually the game's first official foray into the first-person viewpoint territory. I mean, I don't count Resident Evil Survivor from the PlayStation 1 as being a first-person shooter game, even though it kind of was. At least in the American version, it was pretty much a light gun game, like I said, but yeah, I talked about it previously. Otherwise, Resident Evil 4 Remake did come out in 2023, and in February of this year, we'll be getting Resident Evil Requiem, which is starring newcomer Grace Ashford and returning protagonist Leon Kennedy. There are heavy rumors, actually, that we'll be getting some more Resident Evil this year, one of them being a remake of Code Veronica. So who knows what else is in store this year. It'd be cool if we got some more stuff. So, I mean, you can buy all the games in the mainline franchise. I would say the mainline franchise, you can buy them on modern systems now, pretty much all 1 through 6, even the original PlayStation ones. Tomb Raider is celebrating 30 years this year as well, with the first official title coming out in 1996 on the PlayStation 1, Sega Saturn, and the PC. The game follows iconic archaeologist adventurer Lara Croft, depending on who you talk to, who was hired by a businesswoman, Jacqueline Natla. Yeah, I think it's Natla, to find an artifact called the Scion of Atlantis. Gameplay features basically Lara navigating levels split into multiple areas and room complexes while fighting enemies, monsters, dinosaurs even, and humans, solving puzzles to progress. Tomb Raider was praised at this time for its pretty innovative 3D graphics, control, and gameplay. This was also kind of tank-based a little bit, but it wasn't fixed camera angles like Resident Evil was. The game at the time went on to win a lot of industry awards, considered to be one of the greatest video games ever made. That's saying something. It is also one of the best-selling games for the PlayStation, with 7 million units sold worldwide, and it remained the best-selling title in the Tomb Raider franchise until the reboot in 2013. The franchise since then has spawned into animated movies and shows, live-action movies, and of course, books and comics. It was recently announced that the new Tomb Raider movie, which will star Sophie Turner, famous for her role in the Game of Thrones series, as Lara Croft herself. There is a picture of her dressed as Lara Croft with those iconic glasses and just like, the green sleeveless tank top and the short khaki shorts. Yeah. She looks like she embodies Lara herself, and honestly, it looks good. I'm impressed. You're going to find some people that maybe Lara Croft is very well known to have large chest, and Sophie Turner does not have that. However, there's some people in the camp that say, well, that's not how the original Lara Croft looked like. And I think GameStop got in trouble for a tweet that even said, this isn't our Lara Croft. It's like, well, you can go get bent. But honestly, I think she looks great. Recently, we got remasters in the first 6 titles for modern consoles, this was split into 2 games, 1 to 3 remastered and 4 to 6 remastered. You can play these games in their original graphics or updated, smoothed out graphics too. So you can swap them on the fly, which is kind of cool. Recently, a big announcement on her future in video games was showcased a remake of the first title, which is coming this year, which is now be called Tomb Raider Legacy of Atlantis, and a brand new title coming out next year called Tomb Raider Catalyst. Previously, her last official game we got was Shadow of the Tomb Raider back in 2018. So Lara Croft is back. If you remember Tomb Raider Anniversary, which was a remake of the first game that came out of the PlayStation 2 and 360 and PS3, you are correct. There was another remake. So now we're getting a third remake. This isn't or second remake. Yeah. And this won't be the last second remake you'll hear about in this episode. Before we hit our last one, there are quite a few other notable ones I do want to touch on, like Quake. Quake is celebrating 30 years. It was id Software's foray into 3D first-person shooters. Harvest Moon, celebrating 30 years as well. Farming, marrying people, and starting a family, and all, watching your own farm, which is kind of cool. I never got into this series, but Animal Crossing is celebrating 25 years. And it just recently got a big update and a Nintendo Switch 2 version. So if you haven't played Animal Crossing in a while, maybe you want to go back and go do it again. Luigi's Mansion is celebrating 25 years as well, alongside Pikmin. And lastly, Rune Factory is celebrating 20 years as well. I have never played a Rune Factory game in my life. I have not played a Harvest Moon game in my life. The other ones, Pikmin's fine. I've played Pikmin 3. But I'm not that interested in it. It's just, it's not my cup of tea. So, not knocking it. Just like I said, not my cup of tea. So, lastly, Halo is 25 years old this year. And this game having graced our Xboxes way back in 2001 and hit the ground running, to say the least. It was the Xbox's flagship killer app and cemented Microsoft as a major competitor in the video game console space, and its sequels pioneered online matchmaking, social features, and video game marketing. The games have sold more than 81 million copies worldwide, with more than $6 billion in franchise sales total. Halo is one of the highest grossing media franchises of all time. It spans novels, graphic novels, comic books, a TV show, you've seen it, animated films, feature films, fan-made short machinima animations. If you remember back then, Red versus Blue, that's so I miss machinima. And other licensed products, of course. Halo Combat Evolved is a first-person shooter that takes place in the 26th century, and the story begins as the Pillar of Autumn, which is a large human battleship, exits slip space, and its crew discovers a large ring-world structure of unknown origin. The Covenant, which is the alien species hell-bent on destroying humanity, pursues the Pillar of Autumn and attacks. With the ship heavily damaged, the Pillar of Autumn's captain, Jacob Keyes, entrusts the ship's artificial intelligence, known as Cortana, to Master Chief in order to prevent the Covenant from discovering the location of Earth. Keyes orders the crew to abandon the Pillar of Autumn and pilots the ship to a crash landing on the Ring World, which, of course, this Ring World is now dubbed Halo. The franchise at this time was led by Bungie up until Halo Reach, which, to me, Reach is my favorite in the franchise. You've heard me say this before. 343 Studios took it over afterwards with pretty mixed results. The last official title we got was Halo Infinite in 2021. It was a unique open world concept for a single player campaign, but for a next gen game, it just didn't impress in the graphics department. It just looked like a last gen game, which admittedly that generation Xbox Series X came out, the year before. So I guess no surprise. The multiplayer is still going strong, however. 2026 is shaping up to be a big year for Halo. I want to say last year or the year before, I think they announced a rebranding. It's not 343 Studios. I think it's called Halo Studios. And they announced they got multiple projects in the works. So one of them they finally announced is Halo Campaign Evolved. And it's supposed to be coming out this year, 2026. A campaign remake of the first game. And like I said before, we did get one of these already. Not only is it coming out for the Xbox systems and PC, but also on the PlayStation 5. Feels weird saying that. If you want to know more about the Halo franchise, I recorded an episode on the franchise during the Bungie years up until Halo Reach and ODST. Will we be getting more Halo stuff this year? We may. Xbox itself is actually celebrating its 25th anniversary as well. at this time. So, Xbox, I would imagine, has some big things announced this year to maybe celebrate its storied history, some storied franchise stuff. I know Fable is up there as being one of Xbox's biggest franchises, so we may finally see a Fable game come out this year. Who knows? So maybe we'll get some more Halo stuff this year. Who knows? I don't know. We'll see. What storied history of games we were all celebrating this year? I mean, these are some big franchises and some big names, and I'm just as impressed. I don't know about you, but I'm pretty impressed with the staying power of most of these franchises. Some, of course, didn't make it, like Kid Icarus and Castlevania. However, maybe there's hope for the future. And, some can be divisive. If you've played these franchises for a long time, maybe it's like you see your child grow up and you don't like how your child basically grew up, so to speak. A lot of old school fans don't necessarily like to see where Halo ended up. There's a lot of changes that the Resident Evil franchise has gone through over the last 30 years that kind of divided the fan base as well. Even Tomb Raider changing a little bit in not only the gameplay but also the presentation, and even Lara Croft's character. There was the reboot trilogy that happened recently where that kind of divided the fan base. People wanted more of the confident Lara Croft that we grew up with, as opposed to the prequel, hey, I'm Lara Croft learning to become, who I want to be, I guess, in the future. So, nonetheless, these franchises have stayed through it all, have been through it all. Like I said earlier, Sonic has had quite many ups and downs, but still staying strong to this day with dedicated teams working on them still to this day. And obviously having fond memories and remembrances of, what came before. So, and I think that's important when you have these franchises that have been around for a long time. So, let me know if any of you were there in the beginning of any of these franchises. I would say for the most part, the franchises that I played, I remember playing the first ones and remember actually, saying like, oh man, these games are great. So that about wraps it up in this episode. Be sure to follow me on my socials, X, Threads, and Instagram at RetroXPodcast. Whatever podcast platform you're listening to this on, be sure to follow and enable notifications so you can find out when I drop a new episode. Episodes are also live on YouTube. You can follow me there as well at RetroXPodcast. I also want to thank the Hair of the Dogcast Network for allowing me in their group of shows and consider contributing to us on Patreon at patreon.com/hairofthedogcast. And you can join the community where you can get early access and exclusive episodes each week. Thanks for listening.